We are live, so welcome to our impromptu, informal, ad hoc CL MOOC Make With Me. CL MOOC is the Connected Learning Massive Open Online, did I miss one? Collaboration. And so we think of this MOOC as more of a collaboration than a course, which is typically talked about when we talk about massive groupings of people who are learning. And what we're learning about is connected learning. And one of the things that we do in the CL MOOC is have a Make With Me hangout. And those are where one of the principles of connected learning is this idea of production-centered or production-focused, where we learn through doing, learn through making, and think about that. And so in these last couple of weeks, we've been doing lots of things around mediating and remediating our experiences, unmaking our introductions. We've been doing this last week talking about systems and how to visualize systems, make them something that we can see and then work to change if we want to change them or enact them. And all of this has really brought up a lot of conversations around Nick Sousanis' work with his book now called Unflattening, but then also his work with comics, his work with visualizing and all of that. So we have invited him, and he's been very generous to join us today. And so what we're going to do today is just quickly, each of us are going to introduce ourselves to the viewing public. And then we're going to just dive in and hear a little bit from Nick about his work, and then we're going to give us a chance to talk about it. So that's our little introduction. My name is Anna Smith, and I'm going to throw it over to, I'm going to go from my screen left to right. I don't know what order you guys are in, but Terry, could you go next?
Okay. My name's Terry Elliott. I teach at Western Kentucky University. I'm an instructor there. I work with our local writing project, and I've been working with the CL MOOC the first 2 years and this year as well. And my focus has been on facilitation and how to do facilitation. And luckily, we've had a couple of years of basically a treasure trove of people actually doing that. And I've been able to kind of roam through it. And that's where I started using tools like Snagit to annotate with. And that's my connection with you, Nick, is the annotation that I was doing with the MOOC carried over to annotating pages of your book, and that's how that's tied together. And so that's it. Next.
I don't know what order we're supposed to go in.
we can play tag. So Terry, you can say Susan or something, and then Susan, you can tell the next person.
Marco.
Hello.
Susan, you're it.
Okay, I'm up. Susan Watson. I'm in Maryland. I teach at an alternative school, which is the school where they send all the kids that get kicked out of their school. So that's what I do. I teach middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th. I teach language arts, special ed, and wherever else they decide they could use, they could stick me. Excited to be here, Anna. Thanks for organizing this, and excited to get to interact with Nick, whose book I absolutely think is genius. I don't know what to say about CL MOOC because I'm really terrible at speaking off the cuff, and so this is probably the worst situation for me to be in. But I'm here and about doing new things that I don't know how to do. But I think it's, to me, about all of the connections. I've met people from all over the world, and people that I think about all year long that have nothing to do with CL MOOC in the moment. So we interact all year long, even after the course is officially over. And for me, that's what it's about. And the end.
Okay, I'm Sherry Edwards. I teach in a rural public school in North Central Washington, middle school language arts. And I've been with CL MOOC for 3 years as a participant, and then for 2 years as kind of encouraging people. to know what to do next and to know that they're on the right track, whatever they choose. And that's kind of what CL MOOC is really all about. It's personalized. And so CL MOOC offers something, and then we all take it from there and collaborate, connect, remix it, and trying to figure out how to place this in an educational setting so that we're moving into the future instead of sticking with the status quo of a traditional classroom. So that's why I'm here, finding ways to personalize for my students. And I'm going to tag Kevin.
Thank you, Sherry. So I'm Kevin Hodgson, and I teach 6th grade in Western Massachusetts, and I'm part of the Western Mass Writing Project. And like the people before me, I've been involved in the CL MOOC for a number of years now. And one of the things that really keeps me energized by it, I think, is the collaborative nature of it, and the kind of desire that a lot of us have to try to push writing in different directions and try to help other people who are in the CL MOOC kind of see some possibilities there too. I'm excited to be hanging out with Nick because we've corresponded on blogs and in different places after kind of coming across this book that was recommended. I think it was by Ron actually in Rhizomatic Learning a number of months ago, I teach comics in my 6th grade ELA class as part of the way that we write, and try to kind of get into some of the kind of compositional qualities of kind of graphic novels and comics, and have run some youth camps around comic making too. I'm not really an artist, but I'm into the writing part of it, and I guess I can talk more about kind of what got me thinking about that later on if we have time, but it's great to be here. I'll pitch it over to Amanda, since I don't know Amanda. Hi, Amanda.
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's great to see everybody and contribute to this conversation. My name is Amanda Latz. I teach at Ball State University. And really the reason for me being here in this conversation is because two students of mine and I have been intently and intensely reading Nick's dissertation over the past 10 or so weeks. And we started with the intent of creating a book review, which we did, but we, in the process, realized that what we were doing sort of cognitively and in regards to creating a lot of writing and having a lot of reactions to the work in a very good way kind of transcended the book review. And so we decided to convert what we were doing into what's called trio ethnography. Some qualitative scholars in Canada and in the U.S. have sort of pioneered this methodology, and we wanted to try it out because we felt like in the process of interacting with the book internally and sort of in front of each other, we were creating new knowledge. And we also didn't want to just kind of do this by ourselves, but kind of make our thoughts, our work, our ideas about the work public, and we created a Tumblr, a blog essentially, flatlessness.tumblr.com, to kind of catalog what we were thinking. And right now we're in the process of creating a proposal for AERA, so we'll see how that goes. I've had the pleasure of watching Nick's work evolve over the past, I don't know, Nick, maybe a year and a half or so, and got to know him through a mutual friend, Chrissy Blanche, and just have been so impressed by the depth, brilliance and intensity of the work. It's just awesome, and so that's why I'm here. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Who's left? Gosh, Nick and
Scott is.
All right, maybe
Scott,
Todd.
and then Scott, you can throw in it.
Okay, I'll go. So hey, everybody. My name's Scott. I'm a high school English teacher in Glenview, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. I teach juniors, American Lit, and seniors, which is a humanities class. I've joined CL MOOC for the last 3 years as a participant for the reasons that everybody else has basically said. I was feel really fortunate that I just kind of stumbled into it a few years back, and it's given me, like Susan said, these incredible connections that have lasted beyond just the summer months that we're doing this. It's also dovetailed nicely with the way that my own approach to teaching has evolved over the last few years. As an English teacher, wanting to focus more and more on the visual nature of communication, as well as just thinking about how to get myself and my students creating more, doing more, making more in all mediums. And as I said, CL MOOC has just been invaluable for showing me ways to make that happen. Nick, I guess you're up.
Hey, Nick, before you go, I should also mention if people are live tweeting, if they can use the hashtag CLMOOC, then we can, we'll watch that stream as well for any questions that people might have or things that they want to bring in while they're watching. Thanks. Nick.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sorry, I just disappeared for a second. I hit something. Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what to say, but except thank you. I mean, to sit on your own and make this work for this long and then have people want to talk about it and annotate it and make tumblers is, I want to say flattering, but I know that's a problematic word for what I did. So do you want me to do a little, I mean, I think everybody here has read it, but do you want me to still do a little spin through of a talk version and then go from there?
Yeah, I think that almost everyone, I think, has read it, but not everyone, and then not everyone who is watching has read it, and I don't think that all of us have had the same opportunities to hear you talk about it either.
All right. So we'll do a very short version of that, because I think given the making nature of this, we definitely want questions, and we definitely want to see if we can do at least start the exercise. So let me see if we can get this right. And we'll go from there. And one more second. How's that look so far? Are we on?
It's working. Yep, that looks good.
Okay, I can't see you all, so that always makes me a little funny, but here we go. So, and I'll just say one thing. I didn't think this, and I've said it a lot now, I didn't think it was much of a big deal when I went to school and said, I'm going to do comics, because I'd been out of school for a while and I didn't know any better. And so, initially I just thought I would do my work in comics form and that would be that. But in the process of being in school and seeing what's going on and what expectations and what format, etc., I realized what I was doing was this much larger political act, and so the work really became a lot about itself. So while the term unflattening, for me at least, really came out of an idea of how comics work, I started to merge it into other ideas I had about larger things going on in education and society. So, so let me just take you through that a little bit. And so here we go. So by unflattening, I mean I was really trying to tackle something I called flatness, and it was never about a literal thing, but really a persistent state of mind, a pattern of thought that people were conforming to. Where we forget what might be and are replaced by this is how it is. And I was fortunate to come across Marcuse's work and his one-dimensional man, and that really started to help me shape and articulate the feeling I had. And then this came late in the work, but as some of you know, I was a mathematician sooner, so I was familiar with Edwin Abbott's Flatland. And that very simple concept of geometric creatures that live on a two-dimensional world, so they know how to move east and west and south and northwards, but they have no concept of anything upwards, no understanding of things that could be off the plane, or that there could even be such a thing. And I think it's easy for us to sort of look down, I mean quite literally look down on flatlanders and say that's kind of silly and limiting. But the big question then became for me is, what are the ways of seeing, what are the things we can't even know about that are outside of our experience because we lack the tools to see them, we lack the kind of awareness necessary to see them. And I think, I'm coming out of teachers college, and while I've had good experiences in school, I think very much the kinds of things that are happening in education, while unintentional, foster a kind of flatness, kind of narrowing, and I talk about it in terms of boxes, in terms of the kinds of boxes learning is divided up into from a classroom, the physical space of a classroom, from subjects, from time periods. We have this subject from 9:15 to 10, and then we switch. And I think those subjects, this particular somebody who studied both mathematics and art, which are supposed to be very separate boxes. I think these boxes we make are artificial, and in sort of encountering them in schooling and in our lives, we end up drawing them around ourselves to our detriment. And I think that tends to line up thinking in unhealthy ways. And specifically, I'm obviously, I'm not knocking text. I'm only challenging why it is that 12-point font, double-spaced, 1.5 by 1 by 1 by 1 margins are the only accepted form for scholarship and what good thinking looks like. So this work very much became a challenge to that, and yeah, and so I think in any way that we try to represent the complexity of our experience, we have no choice but to flatten it in some ways. In the same way that you take the globe and you flatten it out to do the Mercator projection, which is the top image here. That things like Greenland aren't that big. Distortions happen. That you can't get all the information. You have to, and so you might try a different flattening, like Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map, where he puts it on an icosahedron and then flattens it out, and there you see connections rather than the separations that the top map is. But it still distorts in different ways. So it's like in any way we try to represent our experience through whatever channel we do it, we're going to leave things out in the same way that if you ask me about the weather and I tell you the temperature, I'm not telling you about humidity or the sun or wind or all those other factors. So I think the sort of defining thing for this work was like, what are we missing when we're reliant on one mode, and what is possible, what can we start to make visible when we start to introduce multiple modes? And a big thing for me, the page about my dog was supposed to be an aside. It was like, look, I know I'm talking about visual thinking, but I mean something broader. But I think in some ways this page maybe sums up the entire work. And basically it's saying, the dog's sense of smell is not merely stronger than yours or mine, but it's more nuanced in that it can walk into a room and know who was there 2 hours before, 3 hours before, the day before. It has all these layers, access to all these layers of time that you and I walk in and we see objects and we see things, but we can't know 7 days backwards what encountered that space. And I think that for the dog is a kind of upwards. It's a kind of way of experiencing the world that we don't have access to, but in terms of education, that's the kind of thing we want to introduce. And so for me, comics, without going into my background a lot, partly I liked making comics, so that was just that. But the other side of it is that comics let me be amphibious in some ways, in that I can breathe in the worlds of both text and image, and maybe get a different sense of the boundaries and get outside of them. And so at its core, the very simplest idea of unflattening was, the difference between the two views that each of our eyes produces. Those two things got to get along. They have to work together, and in order for us to catch things, for us to navigate the world, and to create perspective. And it's such a simple thing, and I know I've now seen classrooms where people are all holding up their finger and closing one eye at a time. It's such a simple idea, but I think it's something that it's so sort of taken for granted that we never stop to think about what's actually happening. And I think when we do that, when we come from multiple points of view, we're no longer looking at things head on, and we start to see that they have sides. We can start to turn them over, and maybe step out in some ways. So this is the sort of center of this work is very much about how comics work. I mean, it's a small section, but it is important because part of the argument is, that comics are up to the task of doing scholarship. And I think I won't go into a lot of this, but the important thing to think about for me is that comics I think we see them and we're very excited about them, especially in education, as a new medium in this. But I think they're really, they're extending a lineage of making sense of the world with image that, goes back as far as we've been human. And I think it's not to say something like this is a comic. It's to say that something like this is important to consider and important to think about. This is what humans have been doing all along, and we should keep that as part of how we make sense of the world. So just a tiny primer on how comics work, and that'll help us in the exercise later on. We'll start, Scott McCloud's 1993 book, Understanding Comics, is a fantastic, fantastic work, and I can't recommend it highly enough. And it's a good sort of jumping off point to start thinking about comics, and then hopefully you'll go explore more. But his definition is juxtapose pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence. So basically, if I put my fist sort of cocked back in one panel, I draw a box around it, and then the one next to it, you see my arm extended and that fist reaching out. The reader, this is very much reader response theory, the reader is making the action happen. You're animating it, and things happen in sequence. There's image to image to image, and you keep moving along. And that's certainly one way that comics work. But I think the other thing, so this page of mine, you can read it sequentially, and you should, it's left to right, top to bottom. But because it's a visual form, you can't help but see the whole all at once. You can't help but make connections left and right and left, top to bottom, bottom to top, which means all these little fragments that are comics pages start to hold together. And I know this group is very much into rhizomatic thinking. So it allows, in the book I go into this a lot more than I will here, but it allows both for sequential thought, but also simultaneous all at once sort of recognition. And I'll just give you a couple examples. I was going to skip this one, but we'll do it. This center panel from Watchmen, I think, is a meta commentary on what comics can do. And he says, there is no future, there is no past, do you see? So in some sense, that upper left panel is, the upper left panel certainly happens first in the way that we read it, and the lower right one happens later, but in fact, that lower right one happens 30 years earlier. And so, there is the sequence, but there's also the fact that it's all there, and there's really no past on the page, and time and space are conflated in interesting ways. So, like I said, sequence and sequential and simultaneous are happening all at once in comics. So I'll just give you a couple more examples. This is from a comic about the Louvre. And I think if I cut this up, you could read panel, 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 panel. But in seeing the whole page, you see the pyramid figure emerge in the background, which adds to the meaning, especially because this is about the Louvre. And it's something that only occurs because you can see the whole page at once. Similarly, this page from Gasoline Alley, where he's walking sequentially across the scene, but the scene is staying the same. So there's sort of two kinds of thinking going on at once. And one more of these where it's hard without being able to see you guys. When you laugh, I'll know you get this. But this little character. Oh, thank you. This character is only able to sort of get the fruit because he's able to jump out of the scene, and time and space are conflated in a way that that they aren't in other forms. And I have and so one more example here. This is from my work again. Here I wanted to sort of look at two things at once. I wanted to contrast a sort of typical out and back commute with my wife's commute. And in my wife's commute, it was varied every day. She went different places, different directions, and each day was different than the one before. But instead of saying I'm going to put this and then just sort of put one next to the other, I wanted the whole page to sort of do the work. And so in the background, you can kind of see that repeated commute is in the background. So it's sort of, if you could thump your chest or something, it's making a steady beat. It's going boom, 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 boom. And then in the foreground, sort of drifting across the thing, is my wife's commute, which also is sort of a drifting. So for me, I think comics get really exciting when you can get into the nonlinear, when you can start to layer and do things, do more than one thing at once. And I'm afraid, I think in our screen share, I opened the wrong slideshow here. But so I'm going to jump ahead here to sort of wrap this up and say, I think that the key for me in what comics are is that, what do our thoughts look like? And I think they don't look like straight lines. I think in my own sense, I know that I'm always thinking in parentheticals and makes it hard to talk sometimes because I want to go sideways. And comics really allow for that sort of tangential and layered and the sort of real way that I think thought unfolds. This is an example from Chris Ware's comics, and he's really a master of doing nonlinear and doing, moving back and forth from sequential and tangential. And so the final thing here is also in the creation of comics. So in one sense, I think they really work well in representing how we think. But on the other sense, for me, this was in interacting with my sketches. I make a mark, and when you make a mark, your eyes, which are doing all these amazing calculations every second, start to interact and see new relationships in the drawings you've made. And so it gives you this feedback partner. And so for me, I'm always saying my comics are smarter than my own thinking, and I think that's really true in that I let the work evolve from this interaction with the sketches. And I was happy, and I saw there was a question about that earlier, in the book, to be able to show a lot of the sketches that help generate the work. And I think for me, it's really this idea of play. I put marks down, I put words down, and they start to speak together, and I find things. And so to close, I mean, I think, I feel very fortunate to have been able to work this way. And I think as educators and as learners, I think when we encourage people and we cultivate that ability to bring in the different ways of seeing, the different ways of knowing, like the dog's sense of smell, whatever they are to an individual, I think it really opens possibilities for us, and it makes learning more of a journey than a sort of filling in the blanks. And I think the possibilities for that are just really exciting. So thank you. And I'm going to see if I can get this back to the whole group.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a lot of... Hi.
No, that was great. It was rich conversation. We've been chatting along the side here, and there have been tweets sent out as well. So we have been responding, even though you couldn't see us.
Yeah, it's always odd for me to be talking and not see anyone there. I have a hard time with that.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, because also I know that a lot of your work, you really think of it as part of a conversation, and that's from the conversations we've had and the work we've done. And so I can see how that could be a real challenge. I know that Kevin has a kickstart question.
Burning question.
To dive into.
Not about burning, but first of all, I want to say though that I think I wrote on even your blog this morning that I really appreciate how you're sharing out like your process notes of kind of what you're going through to kind of lead to what eventually becomes your final thing. I think that's really valuable for me as one of your readers, but also for me thinking about the ways to teach young kids too how to do it, right? Because they'll read Bone and think, oh, this guy just immediately, puts that down on paper and it's perfect, like a novelist, and the reality, of course, is very different from that. So I think the more that artists can kind of show that, I find it just really valuable. I guess I'm curious from a teaching standpoint, was there a point in your childhood that, this kind of evolved, or was it a gradual thing? I mean, what kind of sparked you in the direction of kind of where you are now?
Yeah, maybe I know that wasn't a question, but maybe I'll just say a word or two to the first part and then the second. I mean, I think, for me, I spent a lot of time as an arts writer, and I ran a gallery as well back in Detroit. And to me, I always wanted to know where the work came from. And I think I always viewed my role as both reviewer and as gallerist, whatever that is, as an educator. Like, I want the public to come in and get a different insight into those work rather than just saying, here it is. And I think that's carried over into my own making. I've been sharing those sketches in talks, and I find that often that's the thing people are most excited about. I think what you said about Bone is just right. I mean, I think when you see a finished drawing, it's like magic. Like, well, I can never do that, but it's cool. Whereas if you see the sort of, 57 sketches I went through before I was even able to start drawing a final drawing, I think that opens the work and says this is something you can do, and find your own way to do it, but it's something you can do. So yeah, anyway, thank you for that. In my own case, I drew comics. I mean, I drew when I was a little kid, like everybody does, and I didn't stop. I made, as you saw Lockerman in there, I made my own comic through high school, but I know when I got to undergrad, and this was a time before McLeod's book had come out, or it came out in the middle of my undergrad, that the comics were sort of stayed on the side. Like, you go to school, you're supposed to do serious things. So I'm going to study mathematics, which I really liked and I'm grateful for. But comics weren't an outlet, and thinking wasn't supposed to look like that. So I feel like for me, comics kind of stayed in the background a long time. I mean, I kept making them, but I never finished much. And it's not really till my time in Detroit when I was doing this arts work. I got into I was asked to be in a political art show, and I had like 4 days to do something. So I made a comic, and that sort of triggered like ways of working, that the sort of visual metaphor, which is sort of defines how I work, I think. Then I saw the appeal to that. I saw ways that I could make work that could speak to many people without being narrow. Like, I could speak to the left and the right, but by using visual metaphor and no words about it, I didn't have to like exclude one side immediately. And I tried to do the same thing in the book, where, I think to you guys, it's obviously about schooling and education and things like that, but those words never appear. And it's about interdisciplinarity and that word never appears. So there's all these choices to like keep out language that people have a judgment about from the beginning, and instead let them find their own way in, and often that means they read it as though it's about something I totally didn't mean, but that's also, I think, a positive thing. So yeah, is that?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was it.
Not at all.
No.
I know Terry's been dying to ask you some questions. So Terry?
I'm not much of an artist, and I rely on machines, basically, to do anything that I remotely call a comic.
Yeah.
I use things like Snagit to annotate. In fact, I did something recent just the other day, and Kevin said he's not even sure that's a comic, and I had to agree with him. I think it was kind of on the on the far end of the continuum. It was almost all text, but I kind of made my argument to him, and then it got me to thinking about I use another tool called wittycomics.com, and I wonder about. I mean, to me, it allows for fast production, and speed of commentary. And as a teacher, I feel the need for that, but I also feel this kind of sense that this isn't really comics. I'm using comic grammar. I'm trying to be a comic to write a comic. I'm using some of the tools that comics artists use, but I'm not sure it's really comics, because I think there's a lot of tacit knowledge that you have come to from doing all those 57 different panels to get to the one that you liked for a minute and then probably don't like anymore. So how do you feel about comics machinery?
Yeah,
and the comic process.
Well, I have a couple thoughts. And also, your annotations, especially that Ulysses page, is awesome. I would love to see that go on for. And that was really exciting for me to see. So thank you. My feeling on I don't think they're a bad thing. I think that they do. Because so much of the thinking is in the making, for me at least. So I think, I don't think they're bad, but I do think there's some missing out on that side of it. And I also think that I think our view of what comics is sort of characters doing something. I think that's one way of looking at it, but I think if you start to blow that up a little bit, that, working with image and text and then spatial compositions is more important. And so maybe comics don't have to, I think if you try to make comics that look like my comics or somebody else's, it will be really hard. And those machines are the best way to do it. But I think if you try to think about what working in space and the sort of nonlinear possibilities, I think it starts to really change. And so one book that really influenced me, and if the exercise will hint at this, was Molly Bang's book called Picture This, which is her looking at, she's a children's book artist, she's telling the story of Little Red Riding Hood and analyzing it using sort of visual philosophy by Rudolf Arnheim, but she's analyzing it in how, you know, here's a simple example. It's all with cutout shapes. It's just simple cutout colored paper. And so, just as an example, she starts with Little Red Riding Hood. So Little Red is a red triangle. And then, you know, she says, well, what should the mother be? So she makes a big red triangle. So now, if the protagonist is Little Red Riding Hood, now you've got this big red triangle, we all know that we're going to start looking at the big red triangle. So that's sort of dominated. So she's like, all right, so now she makes it as the mother as a pear shape. So now it has sort of, we know that curves are, you know, we know something about, you know, sort of the caring nature of her mother. So that's in the curves, but it's still too dominant. And then she ends up with a purple shape. So it's related to it, but not, you know what I mean? So I think when you start to push in those directions, I think that just gets, because we can all make cutout shapes, you know, and I think that sort of frees you from needing to, you know, and we can all make relationships between them and start to think about what that means, and then, you know, then you grow it into a comic. It just changes things. And I think also Linda Barry's work. Linda Barry's a, you know, well-known cartoonist who sort of turned into a creativity drawing person. I don't know what the right term is there. So her book Picture This also, and Syllabus, which is about her class that she's been teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison the last few years, really gets at not judging drawing and just drawing and making lines and making marks and that you think when you're in motion. And I think that's really key too. You know, I think so much for me, if I'm stuck on something, I go for a run and then the ideas start to make sense. And I think we hear that all the time. And I think Linda's points about that is, you know, if you're, you know, I'm writing and I start writing, and if I'm stuck, and she advises you to just start making spirals until you're ready to do the next, you know, until the next idea comes. But if you stop and like don't move for a while, you're maybe missing out on ways your body can think. So there's my long version of that.
You want me to go ahead and jump in? Okay. This being a connected course, hi. Just kind of curious, not all authors make themselves this accessible, and you have been very open and interactive with us, and just kind of curious what role social media and all of these different connections that you've been so open to have played, and kind of what you're doing and how you feel about what you're doing, et cetera, and what you're doing next. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's good. That's a good point. I mean, me making myself accessible, I mean, these are all, I mean, I don't feel like I'm all that accessible. I'm just me. So I don't know how to answer that first part. But I did something which apparently was also odd from the beginning, is that I blogged the dissertation as I went, which as a comics maker didn't seem like a big deal. As a dissertator, apparently it was not typical. And I would willing to bet people read pages I posted before my advisors did. I just didn't know any better. So for me, I was really fortunate to have a very public conversation about the work, both in my blog and on Twitter, and I spoke, you know, I spoke about the work at conferences a ton. And I also, some of you may have, Anna does at least, and Mandy probably does. I printed little pieces of my work and I gave it away to people on the street. I gave it away at conferences. So I was able, you know, I had conversations about the work pretty steadily, and I think I really learned what I was doing because of that. You know, and and you can see it in the sketches, I had an idea of where I was going, but I think having those public conversations and having that interaction, even though I tend to work very much alone by myself, I do share it, and in trying to articulate it and in hearing people talk about it really helps me figure out things. So as far as being accessible at this point, I'm not Neil Gaiman, so I don't, it's nice that people want to talk about the work, and I'm just grateful. And I think this has been happening already. That I don't see that this is something I wrote that people. I mean, it's awesome that they're studying it, but I think it's really something to study to go do your own thing completely. I'm excited to see it as a jumping off point for people to do all kinds of their own projects and students to do, and I've seen that in a lot of cases, and that's really exciting for me, and to be some small part of a conversation that says scholarship doesn't have to look this way and learning doesn't have to be standardized tests maybe. If I can have some tiny voice in that, I'm really grateful for it. Does that?
Thank you. Yeah,
No,
that's
thank
awesome.
you.
And I think I think actually it might have been Twitter where we met, Nick.
Could be, yeah, even though we live
right?
like down the street from each other.
Yeah, and then we found that out, and I was able to have you come into my class. I was teaching a class on young adult literature, and we were doing weeks on comics and transmedia, and yeah, I think that's when that that all began.
Yeah.
But I'm with you in terms of accessible. In your taking the time to talk to us today, I think that's a different kind of approach, where and I guess this is also the flattening part of unflattening is our relationships and our stature and our hierarchies that often get put into place when things are published within traditional means, right? So that you didn't just go publish your dissertation and then have relationships from that. You had this whole web of relationships that you built simultaneously. I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some sense, I felt I had to be a proselytizer for the form and for my own work, and I had to win over. Not that I had a struggle with it, but I felt I took it on my back to say I am going to go out and win, and convince people that this is important, and also, the work I made. It comes very much out of a place to say, not to make simplified, dumbed-down versions of academia, but to say people are really capable and amazing creatures, and I would rather make work that they can get into and have a chance to say, oh yeah, I'm pretty smart in reading this, rather than look how smart he is and I can't understand this, which I know will still happen because that happens, but I would rather help some audience jump up than, and I think the forum has been really helpful to me in doing that.
Yeah.
Plus, I like making comic books.
Well, and we think of like what. Do you mind if I pitch it over to Amanda, Anna?
No, that'd be fine.
The kind of the Tumblr blog there that kind of takes your work, Nick, and kind of I think moves it in a different direction. I think is kind of interesting, and it'd be great to hear about what she's up to related to that.
Sure. Does anybody have a specific question, or should I just kind of start?
Why?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of dissertations end up on the. No offense to anybody who's done them, right? They end up nowhere. Why his? I mean, was it the visual element? Was it the kind of the core of it? I mean, what was it that makes anybody want to say, hey, we should kind of build off this? As opposed, most dissertations don't go that way. Right.
Well, after having followed Nick's work for quite some time, I was just so excited for it to be on my bookshelf, and I knew that I wanted to give it a close reading, especially considering my background as a photo voice scholar, researcher, and I knew it would be something that I would connect with. And had the opportunity to work with a doctoral assistant this summer, and I said, hey, here's some ideas for projects that we can get into together. What do you think about looking at this book from Nick and writing a book review? And I think it could be really interesting. And so we ended up doing that and bringing in third partners, so myself, Ashley Bingham, and Jessica Griffin. We've worked together to kind of create this. And we talked, we said, okay, how are we going to catalog our thoughts? How are we going to think out loud with one another to create content to write this book review? So we started a Google Doc, And I just started going off on tangents immediately. I opened the book and interacted with the first couple pages and just thought, oh my gosh, I can't stop thinking of Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and I need to go back to that and read on that for a while. And so the Google Doc became much more than just a place to catalog what we were thinking about in terms of a book review. It became, I think, exactly what Nick hoped it would be for people. It opened up all kinds of possibilities for us to go down different trails and think about things. So yeah, we composed this, glowing book review, but in the process there was this dissonance about it, because we needed to speak in one voice for the book review, but we had 3 different experiences with the book. So in the Google Doc, we started speaking out like, man, there's a lot of other ways I want to convey how I'm thinking about this. Here's a YouTube video that really was called to mind as I was reading page whatever. Here's a photograph I took when I was walking on my dogs that just made me think, what are the limits of my perceptions, and how is this walk that I take every day somehow different each time? So we ended up moving from sort of this text-based, text-centric Google Doc to expanding it to include, and then we started mimicking forms. So we had this, each of us in our own different ways had this desire to mimic the form, to sketch and draw and think visually and create visually our own thoughts as we interacted with the work. And I think as we moved from the book review to the trio ethnographic work, we kind of circled 3 findings, you might call them, sort of how the book was imprinting us. And we recognized that we were beginning the process of sort of questioning things and unflattening our own consciousness and our reflections on things that the book was having us call to mind. We mimicked the form, as we say. Writing about the book just wasn't cutting it. We needed to draw. We needed to elicit. We needed to draw upon other forms of displaying our thoughts, like photography and drawing. And finally, the book really caused us to think about our own personal educational philosophies and think about what Nick had to tell us about that, and sort of looking at the lineages of his thoughts and thinking about the lineages of our own, and bringing those together. So it was really a kind of a wild, wonderfully invigorating experience that we're still in the midst of right now, as you can see through the blog. Hopefully that helps.
It does. Can I jump in, or?
Please do.
Okay, just super quick. I mean, I'm so excited about that project, Mandy. And I mean, for me, how you're talking about grabbing other things, and I mean, that's so much how I feel like I write. Like, this makes me think of this makes me think of that, and then because comics let you, visually you can hold all those things in one world. It really works for me. And the other thing is, I'm very, the word only appears twice in the book, but I'm very insistent on unflattening appear with ing rather than unflattened, or very much in pragmatism tradition or whatever, to say that, what do I know? This is where I was at when I was thinking about it, and hopefully, it's a moving thing. It's never a finished thing. And so for it to go become all these other things is just really, it's exciting. So. Anna, I mean, I don't know what the time is. I mean, if you want me to do I can stay till you want to get rid of me. So
awesome.
Do this how you want to do it.
No, I'd love us to do that sort of like response, like Mandy was just describing. Let's get doing an exercise. Let's get doing a make, like we had talked about, and I think that sounds great. And we can talk while you do it.
Oh, so you do want to do the exercise?
Oh yeah.
Oh, all right. Give me I'm going to try the slide share just for a sec. It's quick explanation. So you guys are ready to draw? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's going to be really quick. So the goal, come on. The goal of this thing was to find a way to get people thinking about how comics work in the way that at least I do, but not limited by any perceptions of their own drawing skills. And so I just wanted to show you a couple of comic page examples. This is Little Nemo from like 1908. If I whited out these panels here, I think you could all sort of see that something happens, and then the panels grow over time, and they continue to grow, and then at the end they shrink back down. You wouldn't know the story, but you would know something happened in there. And similarly, not similarly, but in these examples, this grid, the way it is dividing up space, is a very different feeling than the page before. We're experiencing something different. Here, this is from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight. The one on the left, you're in a sort of cinematic, again, like the heartbeat thing of the page I shared, where it's boom, 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 and then the other one is much more fragmented. So the key here is comics, unlike storyboarding. I mean, storyboarding, which they're compared to a lot, storyboarding you need to know, I mean, you care about what's in each frame. But in comics, you need to not only care about that, but you care what their relationship is to the frames around them, their position on the whole page, their shape, their size, and their orientation. So all those things matter. And you can kind of see that in examples like this from Frank Whiteley's drawn WE3. So I think in that way, comics are a lot more like architecture. And I don't know what room you guys are in, but if you're in a room with ceiling tiles and things like that, but whatever, you can kind of imagine putting your ceiling or some architectural elements in your space or outside your window to music, where you'd say, all right, I hit this ceiling, this tile goes da da, and then there's a long one that goes da, and then I hit like the grid on the lights, and so it's da 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 da. So it's got different rhythms by the way that the space is carved up. Does that make sense? Somebody has to unmute to tell me.
Yes, yeah, it does.
Thank you. So I got excited thinking about architecture. So here's part one of the assignment. I'll explain both. You take a single sheet of paper, any size, doesn't matter, and I want you to carve it up in some way, in sort of the ways we're talking about comics. I'll say grid-like fashion, but it doesn't have to be. That represents the shape of your day. So you take a single sheet of paper, carve it up in some way that represents the sort of shape of your day, the spaces you passed, the spaces in time that you passed through over the course of a day. And the key part here is that you need to use the entire sheet of paper. And you can leave parts blank, but it's not like writing where you can get halfway down and say, well, I'm done, and leave the second half blank. If you're going to leave it blank, it has to count for as much as the rest of it. And so the second part, I was like, well, this is pretty cool. This is talking about how we compose a page. But so I was thinking about it. I was out for a run, and I ran on this boardwalk with these tiles, and the paint had been spilled across the tiles and cutting through them. And I thought about my wife's, she's an abstract gestural artist, who captures her motion and physical motion in the way she throws paint at a surface. And so that the second part of this is to inhabit this grid-like carving up of a piece of paper into the shape of your day with some sort of marks, gestures, line, whatever, that represents your physical or emotional activity within those spaces of time throughout your day. There's a river running through Ohio. Somebody tell me if that sounds like a somewhat sensible thing so far?
Yes.
Amen.
Yes.
All right, so let's let me come back to I can see you all. Okay, so basically it's very simple. You carve up a sheet of paper into the shape of your day, the experience of your day, and it can be today, it can be a typical day, it can be whatever day you want to choose, and use the whole sheet of paper. If you leave, you can leave as much as you want blank, but you better mean it. And then, if we probably won't have time for all this, but inhabit that with some sort of mark, gestural, something that represents your physical, emotional activity within those spaces. And I'm going to emphasize, don't draw things, even though I'm sure many of you can draw things and would like to draw things. You don't need to here. Someone will, I know. And someone's already drawn a coffee cup. I've been through this before.
It's a
All right.
teacup.
So I also want to make sure that we can share. Well, while we're playing, I share our processes, so we can all unmute if we want to and share what we're thinking while we're trying this out. People at home can do the same.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the first thing I'm realizing is that I brought paper with lines on it, and I'm really disturbed by that. So
Lines
I
will
want.
help you.
Yeah.
They can help you square things off if you choose to, and break the square if you choose not to.
Okay.
I work on. I mean, I work on gridded paper for my comics, which I have right here, as it turns out. I don't want to distract people from their drawing, but I work on. So it helps me measure things if I care or square. You know, I have a hard time drawing straight lines, so it's helpful when I need to. But okay, I'm gonna be quiet. I don't usually like to talk while you're drawing.
Can I ask you a question, Nick?
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're thinking about frames,
Mm-hmm.
so I was just thinking also, so there's these chunks of time in my morning so far, but there's one particular chunk of time that felt like it went a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that you ever do with frames to show that, or would that be part of the emotional line?
Yeah, definitely with frames. I would do it with frames. I don't know what that means. You gotta figure that out.
I was going to ask you if you have any ideas of how you show pacing.
I know. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm on it.
you know, if you look at enough comics, you start to think about these things, but I trust you.
This must be super exciting for other people watching.
Yeah, I didn't realize
see
there's more of you.
what's on our faces are like, oh, yeah.
Hopefully they're doing it with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, here's what I've got so far.
Invisible. Ah, look at that. So you found a solution, eh?
Well, I'm starting to. Sherry, what were you showing? Show us again.
I missed it, Sherry. Hold it up again, Sherry. I'm sorry.
Oh, Sherry. Sorry, that was Terry. Hey, why is she not?
Oh, you're muted, Sherry. Oh, there you go.
It's just boxes
Yeah.
of times in my day.
Nice.
What will be in it?
Here's what I have. I don't know if you can see. It's a sticky note.
Oh, it's awesome. It's so awesome.
Nice.
Here's one on my nice reporter's pad.
Ah, boombox. Is that boombox?
No,
No?
Hard to see.
no, it's not.
You're making me nauseous. Stop that.
It's a long panel. It's a long page, rather.
Yeah. Doesn't fit on my screen. Hmm. So we have lots of questions.
Who
I
do I
don't.
have?
I think. Oh, here comes Susan.
I don't know if you can see this or not. How do I get
Yeah,
it to be on? Can you see it?
I can see it.
You
Okay.
can see it. I mean,
Yeah.
nice.
Yes.
Here's mine. I don't know how well you can see it.
You're
Yeah,
fast,
I can see
Manny.
it.
My lines on my paper made me feel better.
Fair enough. Fair
I
enough.
like
So I'm starting to fill them.
All right. All right.
Oh.
Wait. I can't focus, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay. Sorry.
No, not your fault. It's not your
Yeah.
screen's not coming in for me.
And hopefully we can share these later too, maybe through
Sure, that
Twitter
would be
or
great.
people's blog posts or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, Nick, it occurs to me, I hadn't ever thought about this before.
Uh-huh.
There's no color.
Yeah, no, and
Honestly, I'd never thought about that before because it doesn't matter. But I mean, I know that's a huge choice.
right. No, I think if you had time for it, a great version of this would be to, have an arsenal of markers or cutout paper or whatever. This is we can do it in 10 minutes and you get the hang of it, and then so there's a few other versions of this. There's color. Color is the primary one. The second one would be to do this as a diary, like for 5 days or something, and just see, to one day you went circular, one day you went, just see if you start to find different ways to organize things. Anyway, thanks, Scott.
It's interesting how many of us did rectangular frames, right? I saw maybe a couple triangles with Terry's and stuff, but most of us fell right back into our experiences of looking at a graphic page where most frames are a very traditional square rectangle shape, right?
Right.
You can tell us that.
In but in groups I usually get a number that don't. Quite a few that don't. So Scott wants to show his.
Yeah.
I can see.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I do have some boxes, but then I also have this other kind of non-linear. I don't know.
Yeah.
Space right in the middle there.
So can I ask you two questions?
Yeah, sure.
And this will maybe tie into Anna's too. The upper, I got to think, your upper left. The upper left, there's the little tiny. Tell me about why the boxes get really small and narrow. That's.
Yeah, I was thinking.
And then why the open space?
Okay, so as far as the boxes wide to narrow, I was thinking about the transition of time. So this is morning, and it starts kind of slowly with just a few of these pops as I'm sort of waking up. So I know in comics, one way to show passing of time and time passing more slowly is maybe wider boxes. So wider to more narrow as I finally start to really kind of wake up and get into my day.
Cool.
And then this space is, well, at least in the summer, I live on a lake, and usually once I'm up, the first thing I do is get out on the lake in some way. So that's kind of why I did that more organic shape in the middle.
Yeah, nice. So, I mean, and I don't, we would really need to interrogate this all more, but I mean, right away people are making choices. Like Anna, you asked about how do I do time faster? So you made choices which look similar to Scott's choices, they're not for quite the same reason. Mm-hmm. But like these are things we know, whether we're trained drawers or not. We know about space, and we know. I don't know who's got jagged lines in theirs. Anyone? Who's got some jaggedy lines? Sherry does. Let's see, Sherry, I'm trying to. Yeah, so you got all kinds of lines. So just briefly tell us the difference between your smooth curves and your jaggedy ones. I can't see the jaggedy ones, but I believe they're there.
She's muted.
Oh, Sherry, I think you're muted.
Those things at the bottom that look like pennants, that's the end of my day.
This one?
Kind of like,
Mm. Oh wait, it's
Yeah.
Terry. I got Terry and Sherry at once. I don't know
Oh,
which
okay.
one. Either one. Oh, they both have jagged ones at the bottom.
I feel like that's the end of my day. The days narrow down to a point as I
Yeah.
begin to fall asleep, and that I don't want to fall asleep, but I'm tired. So it's kind of a sharp point at the end of the day. Then
Yeah.
boom, consciousness is gone.
Yeah. And Sherry, what about you? With
Uh,
the show.
well, I start out with peaceful morning conversations with my husband, and then we go into thinking and reading and planning. That's kind of what I do, tossing ideas around. And then I might check in with somebody, lots of conversation there. And then I got to put all those ideas together in some way. So they kind of meander. I try to organize it, and then it kind of categorize it. And then something will happen that I'm worried about. That's what those are, the worries in my life.
Yeah. So the jag.
Okay.
So I think the key, and I not see things well enough, is that we know just from living in the world that you can lie against a soft curve, but a jagged one hurts, and
Mm-hmm.
it's excited, and it's So I mean, I saw in some, I think in Terry's, he had a lot of sort of frantic marks in some places. I mean, we could spend a lot of time on this, but the point is, we know these things because we live in the world, and I think when you start to think about drawing more as relationships between objects, or not between shapes in space, and between color and those kinds of things, that's something everyone can do, and they can get better at it in their own ways. But I think I think that's really something to think about, and that's to come back to the question about machine comics. I think that's while they have their strengths, that's something that they don't let the embodied feeling into them as much. And for the record, I draw on computers, so I can't really say too much against it. I use it in the way that I use a piece of paper, but I do use a machine, so I'm not sure. But I have mixed feelings about templates. I think it lets you not go in the directions that you want to go. So anyway, do we want to share more? Or do we want to? Where are we at?
Well, I think in terms of time, we're going to need to respect your time and start to wrap up. But what I was thinking of, and I don't want to force anyone to do this, but I would love to hear what thoughts people have kind of thinking about moving forward. So in terms of, so in the CL MOOC, we have a new make cycle starting today. Make cycles are something that start every Monday. They don't end. And so we've had ones that are different, it's kind of like a different focus each time, just to get you going and thinking in a new direction. And one of the reasons why we had this call today was in this last one, people were talking about visualizing systems and the ways that, like you were talking about, Nick, the ways that our thoughts are not just linear. Linear is one way that thought is organized, but especially when we're looking at systems, perhaps the invisible systems that work in our lives. Visualizing those, we can't do it just in Word, in a linear format. And so we were talking about that, and other weeks we've been talking about mediation. I don't know what the next theme is that we're going to be talking about. That it hasn't been sent out yet in terms of this next make cycle, but I know that everyone on this call is really thinking about producing and doing that to further their own learning. And learning about education. So I think it'd be interesting if people want to share what they're thinking about next.
Oh, I'm unmuted, so I guess I can jump right in. Well, what I'm thinking, I love this. So years ago, I used to teach architecture in the classroom when I taught all subjects, and we would do things like this to kind of get our minds going before we studied something. And so I can this kind of builds off the things that I did there, and I can see how this will help my students see what they're working with in different perspectives by creating, when they look at what you've done and some of the examples in the books that you shared with us, that I think this will really help them find ways to express their ideas in ways that mean something more to them than what I could give them. That's what I think.
Cool.
I can jump in too. I think Sherry's right, and I appreciate that you kind of helping us kind of think through it too, Nick. But I do activities where it's open-ended, and it seems like more and more there's more and more resistance from my students on that. Unfortunately, so these are 11-year-olds. You think they'd be open to anything. Unfortunately, I think that the way testing and other things have come down is that they're so primed to the answer is right or wrong that I struggle to kind of get them in the middle ground of picking up your process notes, right? That's where the learning, that's where the creativity, that's where the joy is in a lot of ways. And so I think the more activities we kind of pull in, it kind of allows an entry into that kind of middle creativity point. That is the ethos of the whole CL MOOC, which is why so many of us love it so much. But bringing it back to the classroom and trying to kind of hold off that kind of right, wrong, and that's all there is in life, it's a struggle. And so I don't think I'm alone in thinking that with my students, unfortunately.
Yeah. I feel, I know there's teachers of teachers in this room. I feel that that's something we face there too. They're sort of expected to have a class that says how to write a lesson plan or how to, and you figure that out. Like, my thought in the comics course I taught is like, let's make comics and we'll read about them and we'll read comics, but you're the one who's going to do something and it should reflect you. And we can look at all kinds of examples, but I think that really goes back to thinking about boxes. Like, we're so attuned to thinking that somebody's going to provide me with the ways. I think that infantilizes us. Yeah. I see. It's not a lot in the book, but my daughter was born 3 weeks before I finished, and just thinking about how she learns to use her fingers. And how she learns to walk by like getting off balance a little bit and then, stretching her leg out and thinking this is funny and like, oh, now I can do this other thing. Like, to me, that seems like that's what learning should look like. And if it's I don't know. We've gone. I've been railing about play lately because there's been a bunch of articles on it. It's like, why do we have to keep, every 5 years there's another thing that says visual thinking or play or is the way to go, and yet, in the interim years, there's still the same stupid tests and the same, we should be, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, I couldn't agree with you more. I teach juniors and seniors, and I get the same sort of pushback and resistance from many of them, and it's funny because on the one hand, if I was to just take the traditional route, they're going to complain about like, oh, we always do the same stuff. But as I've been trying to make more and more opportunities for just open-ended thinking and playing and experimenting, they get freaked out, and they want answers, and especially answers to the question, well, how are you going to grade this?
Yeah.
I don't know. Tell me how many points do you want? There you go. It's a huge issue. But then I look at it as, well, they've learned well. They've learned the game. It's not like they are born that way. They have just come to know that is how we do school.
I'll jump in here. We have kids that can't come to us with no. Does somebody else want to go? Okay.
I was just waving at you, Susan.
We have kids that come to us with no confidence at all. And we spent the last school year in my middle school actually teaching them how to doodle because they think they're making mistakes, and our first rule had to be there are no mistakes, which of course is kind of silly to have a rule about not making mistakes, but it's taken the entire school year to get them to actually just be willing to doodle, and it's very mindful for them. It's very calming. So our next step is to try to take it to a different level, which we haven't determined it yet. In terms of CL MOOC, the clue that was in the newsletter had to do with outdoor spaces. So I'm hoping that maybe I can use a jumping off point from unflattening to take a look at some outdoor spaces. I'm still fascinated with the whole infinite measurement concept and the fractals. That's where my brain always goes with this book at this point. So that's where I'm thinking, and I'm excited about it.
Cool. I'd like to hear more about that. Yeah, I'm happy to point you in directions if you want sometime.
For me, Nick, reading your work and C.L. MOOC this summer has been just this incredible object lesson in the idea of the adjacent possible. The idea that you go into it not knowing where it's going to go, but knowing that it's going to go somewhere unexpected. And that's has always happened every time I open your book. It's led to unexpected places. And that's a hard thing to sell in the classroom, so I'm going to keep selling that this year. And I'm also fascinated how some people call the same word different the same idea different things. Because I came to your idea of unflattening through a writer, James Scott, who's an urban planner, and he talked about something called legibility, and how oftentimes what we do in order to make a system understandable and legible, we reduce it to its simplest components, which is basically a lie. And I think that's what happens when we over-scaffold in the classroom, is that we think that we've got a way to get them from A to Z, and it's not quite right.
Yeah.
So, I'm looking at the ways to combine your idea with Scott's idea, and it's really fun. It's just
cool.
Really fun. I appreciate it.
No, yeah. I feel, I don't know why I should feel lucky. I should feel maybe guilty. If I say this a lot, if I had written my dissertation and then drawn pictures that went along with it, it would not be the same thing. Not at all. The paper that Anna and I co-authored with Matt speaks to that some. Like, working this way took me in unexpected directions all the time. And, and I think as I continue with it, I hope it takes me in more directions. I think trusting that more, the unexpected, I've been saying this, and I probably will make a piece on it, the difference between, if we think about school as secrets, like they're secrets, but secrets are things somebody already knows, and you're going to just go, you just got to look in the box in the back of the book and find it. But mysteries, mysteries are things people don't know, and a mystery takes you somewhere farther. And I think thinking about learning as exploring mysteries rather than answering secrets or finding secrets. I'm going to make that piece. Start today. Yeah, I don't know. I think we're all in the same boat here, so yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to jump in really quick, just because I haven't been able to introduce myself. But I'm Monica. Hi, guys. I'm not actually a teacher. I just graduated from UC Berkeley, but I've been with C.L. MOOC all 3 years, including this one. And I have been listening in on this conversation and kind of going along the side of it and decided to jump in. But I really like a lot of the things that have been talked about here. And one of the things that unflattening to me means in my life is an unlearning of what I've been taught in the school system, just because I was told throughout my schooling that I wasn't doing things the right way, and that was always really very difficult for me because I've always been into creative writing and very untraditional art, if there is such a thing, and I was always told when I was writing papers that I didn't write the right way. And so it was always kind of interesting, and I've spent the last 2 years or so as I've been writing kind of my honors dissertation for my undergraduate career in learning that it's okay to write my way. And so I've been going through a lot of unlearning all of the things that I taught myself not to do because I was told that it was wrong, when in fact it was just my style. And learning to accept my style as a personal writer and trying to find that like the system that the school tries to box students into isn't necessarily right, it's just one way, and learning that everyone has their own way of writing and communicating and making art, whether it's through words or comics or images or whatever it is. There's so many different ways to learn and so many different ways to express. And so for me, kind of unflattening is me unlearning the school system and relearning who I am.
Nice. Can I jump in on that? That was beautiful. Just two things. I mean, one, you semi-apologized in the comments for your drawing, which was quite wonderful, and I'm glad I responded how I did. Did you disappear? How did she disappear right then?
I don't know how that happened. She might have clicked on the wrong button. It's recorded though, so she'll hear it at some point. Go ahead and keep talking to her.
Anyway, if you didn't see the drawing, it was really
cool. Good. She's back. Okay, good.
Sorry, don't know what happened.
Sorry, Monica. I was just saying your drawing. You semi-apologized for not doing a comic or whatever, and I'm glad I said whatever I said in there. But and it's sort of ironic given your talk here. But I had spoken, Skyped into some class a few weeks ago, and was one of the people in there was an art teacher or an art teacher to be, and she was praising some kid for drawing an elephant, and the elephant was colored purple, let's say. I think it was purple. And the teacher, so she was the student, whatever you call it, you guys know these words. The main teacher took her aside and said, well, don't tell her that because elephants aren't purple and you shouldn't praise her for coloring it wrong. And she was aghast, and I said, well, did you punch her? Probably not appropriate. But I've seen that same, I mean, I'm now sort of shocked. I've heard it with that case, and then a friend of mine who was an art educator and whose child came through a really good little tiny kids art program at Teachers College and then moved to some other place. And the same thing, that the kid used to draw fingers when he was like 3 or 4 or something, and now their teacher says, well, you're not supposed to draw fingers, you can only draw paddles till you learn how to do it a certain way, so now he doesn't draw fingers. And like, that's just horrific, and it's in an art class of all places, which, anyway, I'm done with the rant. Good for you, Monica.
I think it goes back to that idea of things being contained in these boxes that are flattened, like you were talking about, Terry, right? Where they become legible, and then they become deliverables.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're in this system of like delivering chunks of, and I think you said it's like a lie, or it is a lie. These legible lies that aren't part of this. Yeah. It's an important question. Yeah. So we should let everyone go in terms of time. I'm sure we can keep talking though. And one of the beauties also about this collaboration in CL MOOC is the Flatlessness project as well is that these are ongoing conversations. So I hope everyone will share, tweet, blog, link us, and maybe we can put together a curation of sorts. I'm sure Terry would help us with that we can all annotate or something, and then this conversation doesn't have to end right here in this call.
Hey, wait, one quick question.
Yeah.
Terry or Kevin or Mandy, can you post, because I don't know how to use this computer, can you post a link to the guy's class that he's looking for collaborators?
Yeah, Terry has that, right?
Can you grab it?
Terry?
I can grab it, but by the time
I'm not sure.
You posted a link a little earlier in the chat.
Oh, okay, this is great. So what I'll do is I'll just stop the broadcast for everyone, and then we can do some of this, like make sure everyone has links and that we share that out right after the broadcast.
Yeah. But you guys
thanks for joining with us today.
Okay, we're going.